Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, a weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. Kind of short on time for this episode, so we'll see how long I can actually go, how in-depth I can get with some of the answers. Sorry for no videos this week. The only reason is because I've been doing a co-op playthrough of Crystal Chronicles, and that's been eating all of my evenings since Wednesday, because we got to play it a day early, thanks to Square Enix. So, literally didn't do State of the Realm this week, haven't prepared anything. I have a few ideas for videos I want to do. They're just going to be later because Crystal Chronicles with the pals has been a good time. Now with that, let's get into thanking the sponsors before we get into the Q&A. Thank you to our sponsors over on Patreon for supporting the channel as much as you have. It's way more than I deserve, and all it does is back up the YouTube channel that you didn't get any videos for this week. So always remember, if you just don't want to be there anymore, I don't hate you. Continue to enjoy the videos. It's all free content, all the same. Thank you to our Patrons of Darkness, Khuja Cross on Jenova, and Kurenai Oni, both of them for going above and beyond. Now, with that, thank you to all of you. Thank you to our Patrons of Darkness, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. Let's get into the Q&A, shall we? Hashtag Mr. Michael Mondays. I don't like that one. Don't use that one. Lollyho Haps, hope you're having a good one. My question for this week is, do you think 6.0 will give us seamless zone transitions? No, the game's not built for seamless zone transitions. There's no reason for them to make the new expansions function that way when the rest of the game doesn't. It's not to say they couldn't eventually rework the entire thing and change it, but the odds of that ever happening, quite frankly, is slim to none. Not impossible, but slim to none. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hi, Mr. Happy. Hello. Hope you're having a great day. Hope the same for you. My day's going good. Thank you for answering my last question regarding job changes. Found it insightful again, as always. Thank you. I'd like to get your input on the expansion of the Unreal Experiment. I like to hear it called that. Given how well received Shiva Unreal has been, I don't know if it's been well received, but I also haven't been paying much attention. So, what do you think of the possibility of old Alliance missions having Unreal treatment too? Not nearly as likely. The whole point of bringing Unreal through, obviously, you're well aware if you're asking this, is to bring some old piece of content, something that's weekly locked, that they want to scale upward. It doesn't take probably that many resources to scale it, but they just have to have their combat balancers and their QA really deal with getting it to a set item level, a set damage values. That's probably a lot easier to do for 8-man content and 4-man content than it is to do for 24-man content. So there's kind of like the last question. There's no reason that it's unachievable, but desirable is a whole nother story. I think there's some merit to it because obviously most of us do Alliance Roulette. We get Crystal Tower 99% of the time. They cycle in some Unreal 24-mans. Maybe that reinvigorates some people's desire to do those, and maybe you don't always have to deal with doing only Crystal Tower. It's not even about ignoring the mechanical checks, really, but you also have to consider what content was remade for Unreal. It's content that was already for a very specific player base, or specific part of the player base. 24-mans would generally be considered of the more acceptable level of content. More players can access it, more players are encouraged to access it, and thus bringing it to be on par with the way it was before doesn't really accomplish as much as it does with an 8-man content. However, more ways to access points for the Fox leaves, more, content that you don't just blow through, in my opinion, is always a good thing. I think for the sheer scale of 24-mans and the audience it's designed for, I don't think they'll do anything like this, but I wouldn't be opposed to it because it's, as long as it doesn't take other things away. That's I guess is also the more important. We don't really know how many resources go into properly balancing these things, and if there's a division of labor there that we may not agree with if we were to know more about it on the back end. But without knowing that, yeah, I don't see a harm to this. It could actually be kind of fun. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hello, hi, hey, hello, how are ya? You doing all right? I'm doing all right. You doing all right? I'm doing all right. Long time lurker, first time asker. Welcome. First time bonus of a dance of your choice being put into the game. I don't care about emotes, so somebody else could take that one. Couple of questions for you. One kind of short, one kind of long. They're the same total amount of space on the screen, so we'll see about that. First question, I've noticed in Shadowbringers they moved away from remaking hard mode dungeons and instead focused on trials and solo events. I like to see how my decisions affected the dungeons I completed, such as Incestasha hard mode. Do you agree with the dev's decision to stop making hard mode dungeons based on old content? So I'm 50-50 torn. I don't want 2 or 3 dungeons a patch. It's been a long time since I've ever cared about there being 2-3 dungeons a patch. Most of the time it's a formality. I go through, I complete them. Maybe if I do a roulette, I encounter them, but quite frankly, I couldn't be asked to care. However, the advancement of lore is something, probably my only motivator for even wanting those things in the first place way back when. So I'm always torn on this because I don't want 2 dungeons in a patch, but I'm also not opposed to getting the story advancement of a dungeon. I will say that a lot of those advancements we probably got because they had it in their idea they had to make hard mode versions of dungeons. Around the time Final Fantasy XIV was being made, you have to remember they were modeling a lot of it off of WoW. And WoW for a long time had been doing like normal version of dungeon, heroic version of dungeon. And they didn't want to emulate that, but they wanted to instead move the story forward, make it a little bit more unique. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I really liked moving the lore forward, but it did mean that a lot of them, it moved forward, but not in a very interesting way. There are a few like Sestasha that did, but overall, it wasn't worth, the dungeons themselves weren't exciting enough to warrant me, having all of this work put into it just for that sake. Why is my phone going off? Missed call, spam risk. That's always fun. So with that in mind, I'm 50-50. If they wanted to replace a main scenario dungeon with a hard mode dungeon and put more emphasis on the story and the developments of it, I'd be okay with that. But getting 2 dungeons in a patch, I just don't care enough about the hard mode dungeon advancements for me to want to go back to that. As for the second question, if I get older, my reaction ability to think on my feet starts to wane. Problem that I still love to experience blind progging fights and the challenge it brings, but I'm not sure what to do as I find I keep dying to mechanics. I think you're thinking about this too much. Obviously, what you're saying is, it's a real thing. I think everyone at some point notices their age. I'm not a monster on the DDR machines like I was for 7 years. I like how I played DDR and Final Fantasy XI in tandem for like 7 years straight. It's kind of ridiculous. But I still love rhythm games and whatnot. I just can't keep up with them to the same degree that I used to. Even ones like Beatmania and Stepmania and whatnot. So I know the feel for this. But a lot of the time, it's about how much you're committing to something versus how much you're used to doing something. Like, you might like really fun blind progging experiences, and you may just not think about them as intently because you're kind of nulled a bit to the experience. You know how it's supposed to go. There's going to be some mistakes. The general itch that each mechanic kind of scratches, I suppose, when you're progging through it. What it's like to get into the next part of the fight. Like, you remember everything, but it's all so the same to you, even if a fight is different. I think you need to kind of reinvigorate that that sense of self, that sense of accomplishment that comes with actually blind progging, instead of just doing it because it's fun. Because you can do something because it's fun, but it can still be something that your brain or that you're so subconsciously used to that you just don't dedicate maybe the amount of attention that you used to it because you're just going through the motions. So I won't deny that maybe reflexes are starting to die down, but I think you could overcome that just by putting a little bit more active brain power into it. On top of that, I won't lie, whenever I go into blind prog and the beginning of patch, I actually make sure I have proper nutrition and everything all set up. Regular meals, lots of water, caffeine, because, I'm a caffeine fiend. I have my coffee right here. But considering all of those things are going through blind prog are just as important as considering your actual interest in it, which I think is really the thing that you're going to notice is what you need to actually look at and see if you're really absorbing the fights the same way that you used to, or with the same enthusiasm that you used to. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Haps, hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing well as well, and hello. Just a quick question, with most players getting about 25 Fox Leaves a week and the amount being 600, I feel like we had this exact question last week. I feel like I answered this last week. Yeah, and I also did a video about Unreal. Yeah, I recently spoke on this, so I won't go too in-depth of the answer, but I felt like the leaves, either the total needed or how much was actually rewarded, was one of the things that could use some reworking. So, yeah, I mean, I'm on your side with this one. I'm at 185 right now, personally. But I agree that the reward balance is not structured. I mentioned that in my recent video, which is actually here on the sidebar, so go watch it if you haven't. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Hi, Mr. Happy. Hope you are doing well. I am, and hello to you too. I have a couple of questions, which I know get spread around, but with Summoner. Not a Summoner expert, see what I can do. I honestly think Summoner needs a rework like Machinist got in 5.0. Do you think Summoner will get a rework and feel like a real Summoner? So I actually don't ever agree with the assessment that Summoner, and I quote, isn't a real Summoner. They've moved more and more in the direction of being a far more focused Summoner than all previous iterations, every expansion they have. Even going into Heavensward, where they didn't get a demi-summon, they still essentially channeled all of Bahamut into their being and became the summon themselves to some degree. Following that, they got Demi Bahamut, they got Demi Phoenix. Their actual skills have all been moved to stuff that's on their hotbar. It's part of their set rotations now, the actual commanding of the pet, instead of separate actions that need to be managed all together. And remember, there used to be a time where a summoner would miasma, AoE miasma to bio, thunder, potent poisoning potion, and they would extend all of those dots and then lay a shadow flare down, and that was the majority of what identified summoner. While they still have Tri-Disaster, Fester, and stuff, they moved so far away from that identity, and I think they will continue to move away from this more dot-focused identity. They've shown such a propensity for doing that I don't see any reason to stop. I think what needs to happen is the pet system needs to be reworked, and until it is, I don't see how much further they could go in that direction, but I do feel that that is the way that it's worked. Scholar feels lackluster. I think you wonder if Scholar should be reworked. No. Scholar does not need a rework. Pets need the reworking, though, and if Pets get a rework, Scholar would likely have some aspects of it reworked, which would definitely make it feel a lot more responsive and fun, in my opinion. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hello, Mr. Happy. How are you doing? Good, sir. I am doing well. Thank you, and I hope you're doing well also. Curious question for the week. What would you consider to be your expert knowledge within Final Fantasy XIV, aka your mastermind subject? Well, I don't ever like to act like I am some almighty expert. Here's the thing. Over the years, I've had to endure people's expectations of me, and I say endure because I've taken that as sort of an excuse to put certain responsibilities and certain egotistic onuses on myself. This was mostly in the first 2 years of Final Fantasy XIV, where everyone had declared me, the granddaddy. If you had a question, go to Mr. Happy. And it meant that I wanted to have every answer, and it meant that I needed to feel like I had the right answer, and it meant shutting out a lot of really important information. Since about 2 years after Final Fantasy XIV came out, maybe a little less, I've moved away from ever wanting someone to take my opinion with so much gospel that they look at me and say he's the expert. Because I guarantee you, somebody who is not an entertainer, who is not putting out YouTube videos, who's not streaming on Twitch, but is putting in all the work in the community on the back end, is someone who is far more of an expert on almost any given topic than I am. What I am is a cacophony of information, of sources, as well as of opinions based on the way that the game is actually designed, trying to make sense of things. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the one thing where I consider myself a mastermind subject and expert knowledge, is actually looking at the way the game is designed, looking at objective, and looking at past trends in order to determine decisions that may be made in the future, which sometimes it brings out some great surprises that blow all of our minds, which is great when it does happen, but also a little bit disheartening, because I'm like, man, I had that predicted down to a T, and then they threw it in the garbage bin. Damn it. But that's about the best we could do. I just like enjoying so many different aspects of Final Fantasy XIV that I don't ever commit all of my attention to one of them. I can do any piece of content in the game, as long as I'm interested in it. Obviously I'm not rushing to Ishgard Restoration or the Diadem when that comes out next week. And obviously I'm not rushing to be your healer or caster pro. But I've raided through ultimates and savages on melee's range, and even as of recent, some healers. But it's not, I wouldn't tell someone, hey, I am the authority. I just don't like that power. I don't like that interpretation of knowledge to some degree. Knowledge. I just can't stop thinking about it. And so I don't like to say, I would never want to tell someone, I am the master, I'm the expert, go only to me. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like the responsible thing to do when I know how many people contribute to this community and how some of them pour way more hours into any one individual topic than I do. Hashtag Mr. Happy, Mr. Mondays. Hello. I have a question about a controversial topic, small versus big pulse. This isn't even a controversial topic so much as it is a disagreement in the way the game should be played or the way a game should be approached based on experience. I'm a healer main who is fine with both small and big pulls in dungeons, but I realize there are people who prefer one or the other. Has anyone ever done a test to see how much time is actually saved by big pulls? If we go back to A Realm Reborn, we have much more information on that. They used to not really gate us on big pulls. How like now we pull to a wall, we stop. We pull to a wall, we stop. That was much less of a thing way back when. You'd also have to do it on one individual dungeon. You can't compare like a level 50 dungeon to a level 70 dungeon or a level 41 dungeon to a level 53 dungeon. You kind of have to look at the design aspects of dungeons in any given scenario and try to contain this information in a bubble. That's the number one thing about running tests is you have to make sure that as many variables are under control as possible. There is as few variables as possible would be the better way to put it. So if we can have an exact average clear time difference, we can have a more objective discussion. From my observation, the difference is not significant. It is very significant. I can tell you that. Last night I cleared Snowcloak in 13 minutes with the tank doing single pulls, and I've had expert 80 runs that go 18, 20 minutes. Again, that's not a comparison you can make. You can't compare level 50 dungeons where we're downscaled massively to having way more stats than we were ever supposed to have back then, to something that is current, full of players that have more difficult rotations and, quite frankly, may not know. Another thing that you haven't controlled in this scenario is the players. It doesn't matter if you have one experience with one dungeon and another experience with another. It's about how good the experience is with all 4 of the same people in the same dungeon. Now, if you wanted to put more mathematics to it without even putting it into practice, AoE skills do have damage fall off, but for every additional target, you're still adding a flat amount of potency that's being dealt with any individual cast. Now, I'm sure there's a way out there to calculate the amount of time per cast that's added, per potency that's added based on the total number of targets, and come up with, based on the health bars of the actual enemies, an estimated time that things will be improved. On top of that, things like travel times and how effective certain skills are on 3 targets versus how effective they are on 5 targets versus how effective they are on 10 targets, etc. The use of things like the limit break to help clear through ads, what pulls are the most effective to do that on. There's so many variables that making a comparison between a level 50 dungeon you should be blowing through in no time, especially Snowcloak, which is actually, other than the second boss, incredibly quick because a lot of ads are forced in very specific sections where you can't large pull them. Or, no, yeah, that's pretty much it. Or, and on top of that, you just murder all the enemies because of the downsync stuff. I would say, I'm just remembering back to like 9-minute Brayflox hard modes. Okay, here's a great example. This is not going to be the example you need, but it's the example I'm going to give you. At the very first FanFest, there was a speedrunning dungeon challenge, which is crazy. And I was like, damn, this is going to be competitive. This is going to be cool. I don't want to really do the PvP section much. I want to do this. So I got in line for that. And group of me and a few other people. One person had never played tank, and they were playing our tank. And we all knew how to speedrun Brayflox hard mode, but we also were not playing jobs we were used to. But we still did it whenever. Tank runs through, does the first big pull, forgets tank stance. And remember, we're up against a bunch of other groups. I think like 3 or 4 other groups of 4-player dungeons. We die, we don't kill a single enemy, and we're like, well, we've lost. But we might as well, be good sports, finish the dungeon. Who knows? Maybe somebody else screwed it up too because we're on really unfamiliar setups. We do that pull again. Tank survives, rotates his cooldowns. Now he's used to it. Make sure he has tank stance to keep enmity on things, at least until, we get to the end. Then he takes it off and helps with the AoE. We clear the whole dungeon. That probably took us about 16 minutes with the wipe plus us being on unfamiliar settings. Every other group didn't speed kill. They were every single other group pulling one group at a time. Most of them had just finished the second boss by the time we had gotten through everything. I couldn't believe how far ahead we were on the speedrunning dungeon section. Now, obviously, old dungeon, old sample data, not relevant to today. But that principle still remains the same in that it is definitely significant when you've done as many dungeons as I have. Because I have seen the single pull, really slow, bad DPS, tank not actually hitting multiple targets, everyone single target DPSing, pulls. And it can be brutal. Next one, hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hey, hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing good as well. Hello. Just 2 small questions. Where and when did you get the name Mrhappy? That is not a very interesting answer, believe it or not. I was doing Spanish homework at a friend's house when I was 13, and one of the questions was like, translate this to English or translate this to Spanish, and it was Mr. Happy Monkey. And it was Señor Feliz Mono. And I just took the Mr. Happy part and ran with that. And I only did it because after we were done with homework, we were playing some alien game, some like horde mode alien game on my friend's PC, and I needed to put in my name for the high score or whatever, and I put in Mr. Happy. That's it. It's not a very inspired naming convention. And have you ever been recognized out in public? Yeah, I'm always hesitant to talk about this. So when I lived in LA, I was at a Fry's Electronics, and I was picking out parts for a new computer, and a group of people said, hey, we're, you're Mr. Happy, right? And then, they took a couple, we took a couple pictures together, and it was cool. Nothing that bad. What I found that was really weird and what I didn't like about that experience, before they worked up the courage to come ask me for a picture, they were taking pictures of me from like a distance. Like, oh my God, is that Mrhappy? That was not an experience I'd want to relive. Please, for the love of God, just say hello, ask for a picture, whatever it is. Just taking pictures of somebody and just like, yo, is that him? Is that him? I wouldn't even do that to like a full-blown like real celebrity. You know, I would just like talk about how I saw them. I wouldn't just take pictures of them without talking to them. I don't know. It didn't sit well with me. But yes, that was the one time I've been recognized just randomly out in public. Next question, hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Good morning, haps, or afternoon. What time is it? 1:11. Lucky time. Afternoon. I missed it last time, but against all odds, I've really enjoyed the yokai event. I don't really know what yokai is, and I think the minion mounts and weapons are all particularly awful looking, but there's something about teaming up with people of all levels and zones across the game to grind fates that is inherently fun. I don't want to take you back to 2013 to 2015 Final Fantasy. I don't want to do it. In a way, it feels like an MMO should be, or at least more akin to what it should be, in my opinion. My question is, why does 14 not do more overworld content like this? Other than Fates, there's Hunt Trains, which is another favorite piece of content for that, both for the rewards and the community, but are also completely user-generated and unique gathering nodes. Everything else is instance. Well, you're also missing treasure maps, which, while they do take place out in the open world. We also do have things like Leave Quests. Yep, a lot of people don't consider some of the quests, just because it's under player control a little more directly, to be open world content. Things like Beast Tribe quests, Leave Quests, that actually take you out. For some reason, people have always ruled those out. I don't know why. Blue Mage for a while was that, until we all started power leveling it. But I'm going to give you a very honest answer. Final Fantasy XIV is at its worst when it has less control over the player character. What I mean by that is when you are out in those open world scenarios, when you are just, killing random mobs that are just over out on the minimap, they are much less inspired, much less interesting, and much less fun overall for the average player. That's why you hear so many people just groan when they hear about the Yokai Watch event, when they think about leveling off Northern Phandelin Fates again. And some people just outright just write off the hunt because of whatever. They can't, the mob dies too fast, they can't load in, whatever the reason is. It's clear the game isn't built at its best. It's built at its best when it's telling you a story, or when it's placing you in a more cinematic scenario, something like a trial or a raid or a 24-man dungeon, whatever. The game understands that those are its strengths, and that producing content for a large open world map that is available across the entire world of 14, something that exists in every zone and will get you traveling from this zone to that zone to this zone to that zone. It sounds cool on paper, but it's not Final Fantasy XIV's strength. And I don't think they have any intention of making it its strength, because quite frankly, the less control they have over the monster, over the area where you fight them, and the less control they have over the conditions the player character is fighting under, the less likely they are to create something, or the less able they are to create something that is actually interesting. They could throw tons of volume for stuff out into the open world if they really wanted to, but volume isn't an answer. Quality is. And they take pride in that. And they understand that their highest quality content is under strict conditions. And that's why they'll probably stick to that. All right, this one doesn't have the thing, but it says Lolly Ho, so I'm going to take it. Hope you're doing well today. Hello to you as well. Lolly Ho to you as well. My question is about a new healer job with speculation of potentially being a physical healer type. Hold on, I'll finish because I already know where my answer is going. I've been curious as to how that might mechanically work. Would there be an ability rotation to heal with a gauge to do burst heals? Would it be ranged? Would it have to be a healing? Let me be very clear about healer design, because this has become incredibly apparent based on their decision making for Stormblood and for Shadowbringers. Healers need access to their heals all the time. They need access to heal everyone all the time, assuming they're within a reasonable range. So a physical type healer is not something that necessarily exists, not at least in the prospect with which you are presenting. They're not going to make you do a melee combo before you're allowed to heal people. They're not, a gauge for burst heals is fine, and doing other attacks or heals to reach that is reasonable. But there's no, it's like when people suggest the idea of a ranged tank. Final Fantasy XIV, the boss will be in your face the whole time. There are no ranged tanks. There's some bosses that stand still, like they stand at like the north side of the arena. All the same, it doesn't change anything. Nothing's different about the fight that you're actually doing. And they can't design your job around only those boss fights, because those boss fights are all meant to be doable by the same types of tanks. So with the same the same kind of idea here. Your healer, you'll never have a healer that only functions at one range, melee range, because they understand that healers need to be able to act like healers under pretty much all circumstances. It's like how, you know how melees hate losing uptime, you know, because a mechanic asked them to move out of the way? Imagine if your healer lost its effectiveness. I'm also going to say this as an ex-melee player, someone who hasn't touched it in a while. If there's 2 melees in my party, healer, you're not fucking getting in melee range for any mechanic where there's any remote risk of the melee DPS being griefed by a melee healer or a physical healer. That motherfucker is going to the moon. I don't care what his job entails that he do. That person is going to the fucking moon. And I will have it no other ways about that. So your prospect of something having a hammer for a healer or having some sort of more, you know, physical, I guess, prowess as a healer, it's not unreachable, but the idea of what you're presenting here, making them almost like a DPS rotation to access heals, that's not going to happen. All right, so that's actually the last question I'm going to take that's not part of a light. I'm going to do a few lightning rounds, and then there's, dude, because I was scrolling through and I'm like, bro, what am I reading in my fucking comment section? Okay, and Aloha apparently feels the same way because he just woke up looking for more food, and he doesn't get fed for another 2 hours. You're too early, Aloha. So somebody asked why Dragoon is screwed in like QTE or battle cutscene style things. That's a great question. I also wonder why their disembowel isn't extended by their AoE rotation. Yes, I know Blood of the Dragon is, but quite frankly, that's not enough. That's a great question that I don't have a reasonable answer for, so I'm on your side on that one. A few comments about Scottson from last week. Yeah, dude, it's still such bullshit what happened with him. He was a dude criticizing Final Fantasy 14 just because he came from WoW. All of a sudden, everyone, it was some big deal. Dude, the guy was completely level-headed, cool, and I'm very upset that he let that just affect him so much that it led to what eventually happened with him, man. That still upsets me so much. We got a few spoiler-related questions, some of them kind of old. I'll give some brief answers without reading them. Is the rejoining already screwed because of the void? We don't know that. There's a chance it could be reverted, but for now, yeah, that would be the basic interpretation. The end of 5.0 Shadowbringers maybe could have resolved it if we had let it take place the way that one Emmett Selk wanted it to happen, but we also didn't let that play out. So, yeah, that's the good question there. What else is there? There was a spoiler buffer here. Something about I'm not sure. Oh, this one just said, do you think we'll either go to Thavnair or Sharlayan next expansion? I mean, we got it at some point, even if it's in an instance, right? I don't know if it'll be the next expansion, but like, you gotta imagine at some point. Honestly, Mericidia trades, I think, with Thavnair almost exclusively. I think it's Thavnair. It's been a while since I've had this conversation. So maybe if we're going to Mericidia, that would be like our way in almost would be through Thavnair. I think that's the port city that they exclusively trade with. I'll have to double check that. Let's see, what else is there? The Fox question, Summoner question, Expert Knowledge question. Yeah, here's a lightning round question. What are your stance on the blue ruining fate farming? Bro, I went blue mage to fates, and even I just didn't use missile unless I was like the only one doing it, or it was me and one other person, and it was like a super fate that was open to it. And even then, I do it just once. It got out of hand, dude. Even as a blue mage, I was doing Outer Lenosha, which is one of the fastest zones because of the way the fates respawn. And there were people who just started, like, at first it was perfectly fine. There may maybe be like one missile. By the time I was like wrapping up my last few medals, there were tail screws missiles everywhere, and I'm like, dude, I'm not gonna contribute to that. It's rude to just completely screw everyone else over. One or two maybe, but not a bunch of people doing it at the same time and just insta-KOing. I think you saw Aloha in the camera right there. I couldn't stand that. I wonder what you're going to do to make their new healer differentiate from the regen shield formula. You don't have to differentiate from it. It's access to power. That is what identifies jobs on Final Fantasy XIV. So for example, if there was an alchemist, or I'm sorry, if there was a chemist or an apothecary of some kind, and their, main job gauge thing was they had to mix potions in order to create stronger ones, like kind of like a dancer, ninja mudra. That would be their access to power. They wouldn't have to really differentiate. That would be the way they actually access whatever their tools are. And that's the more important thing. What's another one? Something about Genshin Impact, but the person said the other day eyes emoji the game Genshin Impact, and then there's nothing else here. I don't know if that's just YouTube bugging out, but yeah, I plan on playing Genshin Impact when that comes out. Let's see, the yokai question. Something about, does enmity generated from dots with tank stance on or tank stance off affect the overall enmity? Yes, it should. As soon as an action is committed with a tank stance on, it'll carry that enmity multiplier over through the rest of the dot, because dots snapshot your buffs in order to determine their effectiveness. Tank stance is considered something that is snapshotted like that, so yes. Another 5.3 spoiler. Do you think we might learn, I'll summarize it. Do you think we might learn about certain Ascians and their previous lives and how they affected history, such as one individual running the Garlean Empire? I think we'll slowly learn about that. I think we've already seen bits and pieces of it. We can kind of put 2 and 2 together, but I do think that we will. And how do you think Gaius also saw? Oh, no, I'm not going to mention that one, because that one's, there's no question there. It's just a statement. What else is there? 5.3 story references. Upcoming conflict with blank and blank will be the final conflict of the story. So it says this final story of the star is coming. This has been a big thing that's talked about without talking about the actual events. Let me be clear about something. Final Fantasy XIV won't end until it stops making money. We know there's other planets, we know there's other shards, and they can always write a new threat into any game. So the game is nowhere close to coming to an end unless it stops making money. That's pretty much all I ever need to think about. Let's see. Do you ever think they'd combine Trust and Squadrons? No. I think they'll keep them separate. I think they'll add Trust to some lower level stuff that Squadrons can't do currently, such as Praetorium and Castrum. We know that we knew months ago they were considering that. It was actually mentioned again recently. So maybe to stuff like that. But other than that, no, I don't think they'll ever, I guess, like merge them in any way, shape, or form. What's this? I think it sucks that the only content to do with our Savage gear is Ultimate. Do you think they make high-end content for 4 players? No, I go over this all the time. The game is not very well designed to create content for 4 players. You essentially just have to hyperscale damage taken and damage required, and that's it, because you lose a lot of the ability to do interesting mechanics when you have only 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS. It also means that the 2 DPS are going to be very meta-locked. You're either going to play certain DPS or even a certain healer or even a certain tank in this case, or you're going to be considered a liability, and that's going to really narrow the amount of jobs that can do any sort of serious 4-man content down a lot more than we see with 8-mans and 24-mans, especially 24-mans. Who gives a shit, right? And I think that's actually the last question. Oh, what webcam do you use? It's actually like a Canon HD camera hooked up through a capture card, an AverMedia capture card. So I do have a Logitech C920. This would be like the beginner webcam that I'd recommend for most people. You can fine tune its settings and it works really well. So if you're just looking for something cheap, C920. I think I heard they're coming out with a new webcam, or they recently came out with a new webcam that's better. But the C922, don't buy that one. And then so I think that's the last one. Are you going to do a BA guide video? I feel like I answer that weekly. No, I said I might do like a 3 or 4 minute video pointing people to Baldesion Arsenal resources, but that I don't feel like I can do anything that contributes more than those players already have. I think I even answered that in the last week's episode. Man, I did not mean to favorite that. I was trying to scroll down. All right, I cut off at the last question because I got way too heated in my initial response to this. But after I was done reading all the questions in the first take, before I even started answering the questions, I noticed there was a comment criticizing that in my description of my video, I do have resources for Black Lives Matter. I do have resources for the Trevor Project. I'm going to say this very, very simply for this outro instead of rambling on for about 15 minutes like I did the first time. If you have any issue with me supporting either of those things, then fuck off. I don't want your viewership and I don't want you here. Bottom line. So that's going to be a much more concise ending to this week's episode of Mondays with Mr. Happy. Thank you for watching this week's episode. If you have a question for next week, you can ask it in the comment section of the video below. And hopefully I don't read as many dumb things as I did this week, because, oh boy. But on that note, thank you for everyone watching. Thank you to my patrons for supporting my Patrons of Darkness as well. And I will see all of you next week for when I'm there, because it's my video. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Until then, take care.